15 minutes. That's all Jessica Lewis had left before losing her 35-year career. She just ripped up a black teen's ticket, without checking it, on his birthday. What she didn't know, his aunt worked for the airline and was walking toward her right now. Jessica Lewis, a flight attendant with perfectly styled blonde hair and a crisp navy uniform, held the torn pieces in her manicured fingers. Her face was twisted with disgust, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at Andrew the way someone might look at gum stuck to their shoe. "This ticket is fake," she announced loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "I've been doing this job for 35 years, and I know a counterfeit ticket when I see one." Andrew's throat felt tight. He tried to speak, but the words caught somewhere between his chest and his mouth. Around him, dozens of passengers turned to stare. Some whispered to each other. Others pulled out their phones. "Ma'am, I bought this ticket online," Andrew managed to say, his voice shaking. "It's real. I have the confirmation email." "Don't man me with your lies," Jessica snapped, cutting him off. She crossed her arms over her chest, the torn ticket pieces still dangling from her hand. "I'm calling security. You're not getting on this plane." Andrew felt his face grow hot, not from anger, though that was building inside him like a storm, but from embarrassment, from shame he shouldn't have felt, but did anyway. He was 16 years old, standing in Detroit Metropolitan Airport, trying to fly to Chicago for a mathematics competition he'd worked all year to qualify for. And now this woman was treating him like a criminal. "Please," Andrew said, pulling out his phone with trembling hands. "I can show you the email. I can call the airline. This is a mistake." Jessica's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough that only Andrew could hear her next words, though the cruelty in them was unmistakable. "The only mistake here is thinking you could pull this off. Now step aside before I have you arrested." Two other flight attendants stood behind Jessica, watching the scene unfold. One of them, a younger woman with kind eyes, looked uncomfortable. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. The other attendant, an older man with gray hair, simply nodded along with everything Jessica said. Andrew's hands wouldn't stop shaking as he scrolled through his phone, desperately searching for the confirmation email. His vision blurred slightly. Whether from tears or panic, he wasn't sure. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not when he'd worked so hard. "I'm not moving," Andrew said, surprised by the steadiness that suddenly entered his voice. "This is my ticket. I paid for it. And I'm getting on that plane." The whispers around him grew louder. More phones came out. A woman nearby told her husband, "He's just a kid." A businessman in a suit shook his head and muttered something about these situations. Jessica's face turned red. Her jaw clenched so tight Andrew could see the muscles working beneath her skin. She spun around toward the gate desk and grabbed the phone, punching numbers with aggressive jabs of her finger. "Security to gate C-17, she said into the phone, her voice sharp and commanding. "We have a situation. Possible fraud. Send someone immediately." Andrew's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. This was really happening. She'd really torn his ticket. She'd really called security. And in just a few minutes, armed security officers would arrive, and everyone would assume he'd done something wrong, because that's what people always assumed. The younger flight attendant finally stepped forward. "Jessica, maybe we should just..." "Don't." Jessica cut her off without even looking at her. "I'm the senior attendant here. This is my call." Andrew looked down at the torn pieces of his boarding pass scattered on the industrial carpet. Each piece represented something. His mother's extra shifts at the hospital to afford the ticket, his late nights studying for the competition, his dreams of winning a scholarship that could change his family's life. And this woman had just ripped it all apart. He looked up at Jessica Lewis, at her cold eyes and her satisfied smirk, and something hardened inside him. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to apologize for something he didn't do. He was going to stand right here and prove he belonged on that plane. "My mother is a nurse at Henry Ford Hospital," Andrew said clearly, loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "She worked double shifts to buy this ticket, so I could compete in the national math competition. I earned my spot there. And you just destroyed my ticket because it's fake, Jessica interrupted, her voice rising to a shout. She took a step closer to Andrew, invading his space in a way that made several onlookers gasp. And if you don't move right now, you'll be charged with more than just fraud. The gate area had gone almost completely silent. At least 50 people were watching now, creating a loose circle around the confrontation. Some filmed openly. Others watched with expressions ranging from concern to shock to something that looked like recognition, as if they'd seen the scene play out before in their own lives. Andrew saw his reflection in the window behind Jessica, a tall, slim teenager in his best button-down shirt and khaki pants, looking much younger than his 16 years despite his height. He looked scared. He looked small, but he wasn't going to back down. "I want to speak to your supervisor," Andrew said. Jessica laughed, actually laughed a harsh, mocking sound that made Andrew's stomach twist. "Oh, honey, I am the supervisor. I'm the lead flight attendant on this route. There's nobody here who outranks me." From somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "Let the kid show you his email." Jessica's head snapped toward the crowd, her eyes searching for whoever had spoken. "This doesn't concern any of you. Please return to your seats." But nobody moved. If anything, more people pressed closer, curious and concerned. Andrew found a confirmation email on his phone. His hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a cold, determined calm. He held the phone up, tilting it so Jessica could see the screen clearly. "Here," he said, "my confirmation. Flight 2847 to Chicago. Seat 23B. Purchased 18 days ago." Jessica barely glanced at the phone. She waved her hand dismissively, as if Andrew were showing her a child's crayon drawing instead of legitimate proof. "Anyone can fake an email," she said. "I've seen it all before." "Then scan my ID," Andrew pressed. "Look me up in your system. Do whatever you need to do. Just stop treating me like a criminal when I haven't done anything wrong." For just a moment, so brief Andrew almost missed it, something flickered across Jessica's face. Not guilt, exactly, but perhaps awareness. A tiny crack in her certainty. Then her face hardened again, even more than before, as if that moment of doubt had made her angry at herself. "Security will sort this out," she said coldly, turning away from Andrew entirely. Not my problem anymore. But it was her problem. It was going to become the biggest problem of her entire life. Because walking toward gate C-17 at that very moment, having just arrived at the airport, was someone Andrew didn't see yet. Someone whose presence would change everything about this situation. Someone who had heard Jessica's raised voice from down the terminal and was now moving quickly toward the commotion, their face already shifting from confusion to recognition to barely contained fury. Andrew stood there, surrounded by strangers, his torn ticket on the ground, security on their way, his dreams apparently destroyed. He had no idea that in exactly 15 minutes, Jessica Lewis would lose everything she'd spent 35 years building. And it would all start with a person who was, at that exact moment, just 10 gates away and closing fast. If you believe nobody should be judged by the color of their skin before they're judged by their character, hit that subscribe button. Only people who support discrimination would scroll past this story. Don't be one of them. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Jessica Lewis was before that moment. You need to see the path that led her to tear up a teenager's ticket without a second thought. Jessica hadn't always been cruel. 35 years ago, when she was just 22 years old, Jessica had walked onto her first airplane as a flight attendant with stars in her eyes and dreams in her heart. She loved everything about flying, the whoosh of takeoff, the view above the clouds, the idea of helping people reach their destination safely. Back then, she smiled at every passenger. She learned their names. She brought extra snacks to crying babies and nervous flyers. She genuinely cared. But somewhere along the way, between year 5 and year 10, something changed. The job that once felt magical started feeling ordinary. The passengers who once seemed interesting started seeming annoying. And Jessica discovered something that many people discover when they stay in the same position too long. Power, even a little bit of power, can be intoxicating. As a senior flight attendant, Jessica had authority. She could upgrade passengers or move them to worse seats. She could enforce rules strictly or look the other way. She could make someone's day wonderful or absolutely miserable. And over the years, she learned exactly who received her kindness and who didn't. It wasn't something she admitted to herself. Jessica would have been horrified if someone had called her racist outright. She would have pointed to the one black co-worker she was friendly with, or mentioned that time she helped an elderly black woman with her luggage. But deep in her heart, in a place she never examined too closely, Jessica had absorbed the poison that society sometimes feeds people. She learned to see certain passengers as problems before they even spoke. She learned to be suspicious of certain teenagers, certain names, certain faces. And Andrew Campbell, standing at her gate with his confirmation email and his cheap phone and his nervous energy, had triggered every one of her buried prejudices. Now, standing at gate C-17 with Andrew's torn ticket in her hand, Jessica felt completely justified in her actions. She'd been doing this job for 35 years. She knew things. She could spot trouble from a mile away. The younger flight attendant, her name was Rebecca, touched Jessica's elbow gently. "Jessica, I really think we should just check the system. It'll take 30 seconds. Jessica pulled her arm away sharply. "Rebecca, you've been doing this job for what, 3 years? 4? I've been flying since before you were born. Trust me on this." Rebecca's face fell, but she stepped back. Nobody argued with Jessica Lewis. Not if they wanted to keep their shifts, their preferred routes, their comfortable position in the airline hierarchy. The older male flight attendant, David, stood with his arms crossed, nodding. "Jessica's instincts are usually right," he said, though he hadn't looked at Andrew's phone either. "Better safe than sorry." Andrew stood in the center of the growing crowd, still holding his phone, still refusing to move. His eyes met Jessica's, and she saw something there that made her uncomfortable, not fear, which she'd expected, but disappointment. Sadness. Why should she care what this kid thought of her? "Ma'am, please." Andrew tried one more time, his voice quieter now. "Just look at the email. That's all I'm asking. Just look." Jessica felt the eyes of dozens of passengers on her. She heard their whispers, felt their judgment, and instead of making her reconsider, it made her double down. She'd spent 35 years building her reputation. She wasn't about to let some teenager make her look foolish. "I don't need to look at anything," Jessica said firmly. "I made my decision." From the crowd, a young mother holding a toddler spoke up. "But what if you're wrong?" Jessica's head snapped toward the woman. "Excuse me." The woman's face flushed, but she continued. "I just mean, what if his ticket is real? You'd be stopping him from—" "I suggest you worry about your own boarding process," Jessica interrupted coldly, "unless you'd like me to take a closer look at your ticket as well." The threat hung in the air. The woman's eyes widened, and she quickly looked down, bouncing her toddler and backing away into the crowd. That's how it worked, Jessica knew. You establish dominance. You make an example. You show everyone who's in charge. Andrew watched this exchange, his jaw tight. You can't just threaten people because they're trying to help. "I can refuse service to anyone who disrupts the boarding process," Jessica shot back. "That includes you and anyone who interferes with my duties." The gate area was packed now. The flight was supposed to board in 10 minutes, but nobody was scanning tickets. Everyone was watching the confrontation, like it was a movie playing out in real time. Jessica pulled out her tablet, the one that could, in fact, scan Andrew's ID and confirm his ticket in seconds. She held it against her chest protectively, as if Andrew might try to grab it. "Security is on their way," she announced to the crowd. "Everyone needs to clear the area so we can handle the situation properly." But nobody moved. If anything, more people pulled out their phones. Jessica could see herself being recorded from multiple angles. A small voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, she should de-escalate the situation. She squashed that voice immediately. Andrew took a slow breath. His mother had taught him about moments like this. She'd sat him down when he was 12, after a security guard had followed him to a store for no reason, and explained the rules. "Stay calm," she'd said. "Be respectful, even when they aren't. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Record if you can. And remember, baby, Their behavior says everything about them and nothing about you. Andrew pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. His hands were steady now. I'm recording this, he announced clearly. For my protection. Jessica's face went white, then red, then almost purple. You will not record me. That's against airline policy. It's not against the law, Andrew said quietly. And I have the right to record in a public space when I feel threatened. Threatened? Jessica's voice reached a pitch that made several people wince. You're the one threatening me. You're the one with the fake ticket trying to commit fraud. She was losing control now, and somewhere deep inside, she knew it, but she couldn't stop. Pride and prejudice and 35 years of unchecked authority were a powerful combination. David, the older flight attendant, finally stepped forward. Jessica, maybe we should just... No! Jessica shouted. She was breathing hard now, her chest rising and falling rapidly. I am the lead attendant. This is M.Y. Gate, and I say this boy doesn't board. The word boy hung in the air with particular weight. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Andrew felt the familiar sting of that word. Not just boy, in the friendly way adults sometimes address male teenagers, but boy in that old way, that loaded way, that way that reduced him to something less than human. My name is Andrew Campbell, he said, his voice cutting to the tension like a bell. I'm 16 years old. I'm a student at Cass Technical High School. I have a 4.0 GPA. I qualified for the National Mathematics Competition by scoring in the top 1% of all participants in Michigan, and my ticket is real. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Several people actually started clapping. Someone shouted, "Let him on a plane." Jessica felt control slipping through her fingers like sand. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The kid was supposed to slink away in shame. Security was supposed to arrive and handle everything quietly. Her authority was supposed to mean something. I don't care about your grades or your competition, Jessica said, her voice shaking with rage. Rules are rules, and I have the right to refuse anyone I suspect of. She never got to finish that sentence, because that's when a voice, loud and clear and absolutely furious, cut through the entire gate area like thunder. Jessica Marie Lewis. Everyone froze. Every single person turned toward the source of that voice. Walking toward the gate with long, powerful strides was a woman in her mid-50s. She wore an expensive business suit, carried herself with unmistakable authority, and her face was set in an expression of barely controlled fury. Jessica's face went completely white, because the woman marching toward her, the woman who had just shouted her full name with the force of judgment itself, was someone Jessica knew very well. It was Margaret Richardson. And Margaret Richardson was the regional director of customer experience for the entire Midwest division of the airline. Margaret was also Andrew Campbell's aunt. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her brain couldn't process what was happening. Why was Margaret here? How did she know? What was... And then Jessica saw the way Margaret looked at Andrew, saw the protective fury in her eyes, saw Andrew's face light up with relief and recognition. Aunt Maggie, Andrew said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. The puzzle pieces clicked together in Jessica's mind to the sound of a prison door slamming shut. She'd just torn up the ticket of a regional director's nephew. She'd just humiliated and accused of fraud the family member of one of the most powerful people in the company. She'd just destroyed her entire career in the space of 15 minutes, all because she refused to take 30 seconds to verify a ticket. Margaret reached Andrew first, pulling him into a quick, fierce hug before turning her full attention to Jessica. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "Ms. Lewis," Margaret said, her voice deadly calm now, "would you like to explain to me why my nephew's boarding pass is in pieces on the floor?" Jessica's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her hands, still holding the torn ticket, began to tremble. David and Rebecca took several large steps backward, suddenly very interested in their own tablets. The crowd pressed closer, phones recording every second. And Jessica Lewis realized, with a dawning horror that threatened to swallow her whole, that everything she spent 35 years building was about to come crashing down, all because of one black teenager whose ticket she refused to check. All because of 35 years of getting away with her biases. All because she'd finally picked the wrong person to discriminate against. Margaret pulled out her own phone, her eyes never leaving Jessica's face. "I'm calling corporate headquarters," she said quietly. "And then I'm calling the airport police. Not for Andrew, but to file a formal complaint against you for discrimination and abuse of authority." Jessica's knees actually buckled slightly. She reached out to steady herself against the desk. I didn't know," Jessica stammered. "I thought the ticket looked—" "The ticket looked what?" Margaret's voice rose again. "Show it to me. Show me what was wrong with his ticket." Jessica looked down at the torn pieces in her hand. Even now, even facing the end of everything, she couldn't bring herself to admit the truth. There had been nothing wrong with the ticket at all. She'd never even really looked at it. She'd seen Andrew, young, black, nervous, and made her decision in seconds based on nothing but prejudice. "I want you to know something, Jessica," Margaret said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The quiet was somehow more terrifying than the shouting. "Andrew told me about this competition weeks ago. He was so excited. He studied every single night. His mother worked extra shifts to afford this ticket because she believed in her son's dreams. And you—" Margaret's voice broke slightly with emotion before she regained control. "You tried to take all of that away from him, not because of anything he did, but because of who he is." The words hit Jessica like physical blows. Around them, the crowd was absolutely silent, hanging on every word. Rebecca, the younger flight attendant, had tears streaming down her face. Several passengers were crying too. Jessica wanted to disappear. She wanted to rewind time. She wanted to be anywhere but here, facing the consequences of her actions in front of hundreds of witnesses and dozens of recording phones. But there was no escape. Margaret made a call, then another, then another. Each conversation was brief, clinical, devastating. "Yes, that's correct. Racial profiling. Complete refusal to verify. Aggressive behavior toward a minor. Threats made to other passengers. All captured on multiple videos." Jessica felt the walls closing in. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps. And then Margaret said something that made Jessica's blood run cold. "I'm also calling the news. Channel 4, Channel 7, and CNN. Because this isn't just about one incident. This is about a pattern of behavior that needs to be exposed." Jessica's legs finally gave out. She sank into a chair, her perfect uniform crumpling, her perfect hair falling into her face. 35 years. Gone. Just like that. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was yet to come. Because approaching gate C-17 at that very moment, having been alerted by another passenger's viral tweet, was someone else whose presence would turn this situation from a career-ending disaster into a national scandal. Someone with a camera crew. Someone who specialized in exposing exactly these kinds of injustices. And when they arrived, Jessica Lewis would discover that losing her job was just the beginning of her consequences. The real reckoning was still 60 seconds away. Like this video, if you believe that discrimination should have consequences. People like Jessica Lewis count on us staying silent. Don't give them that power. Hit that like button, and let's stand against prejudice together. The journalist's name was Patricia Okonkwo, and she built her entire career on moments exactly like this one. Patricia worked for a national news network that specialized in civil rights issues and social justice stories. She had a reputation for being fair but fierce, thorough but fast. When her phone buzzed with a tweet about a black teenager being accused of fraud at Detroit Metro Airport, she'd been having coffee just 2 terminals away. She'd grab her cameraman, Jerome, and they'd run. Now, as Patricia rounded the corner to gate C-17, her experienced eyes took in the scene instantly. The crowd of passengers with phones out, the torn boarding pass on the floor, the terrified flight attendant slumped in a chair, the angry executive in the business suit, and at the center of it all, a tall, scared teenager trying very hard to be brave. "Jerome, start rolling," Patricia said quietly. "Get everything." Margaret saw Patricia approaching and recognized her immediately. Most people in corporate America did. Patricia had broken at least a dozen major discrimination stories in the past 5 years. Her investigations had led to policy changes, lawsuits, and criminal charges. Jessica saw Patricia too, and if possible, her face went even paler. She recognized that camera, that confident walk, that determined expression. She'd seen Patricia Okonkwo on television, exposing people exactly like. No, Jessica's mind refused to complete that thought. She wasn't like those people. She wasn't racist. She just made a mistake. A simple mistake about a ticket. But even as she thought it, Jessica knew it was a lie. Patricia walked straight to Andrew. Hi there. I'm Patricia Okonkwo with Justice News Network. I've been seeing tweets about what happened here. Would you be willing to talk to me? Andrew looked at his aunt, who nodded encouragingly. He swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. Patricia smiled warmly at him. A real smile, not a reporter smile. You don't have to call me ma'am. Patricia is fine. And before we do anything else, are you okay? Did anyone hurt you? The question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly broke Andrew's composure. His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back. I'm okay, he said. Just confused and angry. I didn't do anything wrong. I know you didn't, Patricia said firmly. Then she turned to Jessica, and her expression changed completely. But I'd like to understand exactly what happened here. Let's start from the beginning. Jessica stood up on shaky legs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to refuse to talk, to call a lawyer. But she was still in her uniform. She was still technically on duty. And walking away from a journalist would only make things worse. There was a question about his ticket, Jessica began, her voice barely above a whisper. A question? Patricia repeated. Can you be more specific? What exactly was questionable about his ticket? Jessica's mouth opened and closed. What could she say? That she'd never actually looked at it properly? That she'd made assumptions based on nothing but Andrew's appearance? It seemed irregular. Jessica finally managed. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Irregular how? Was the barcode damaged? Was the name incorrect? Was there a problem with the flight number? I've been doing this 35 years, and I can tell when something isn't right. So you're saying you can tell a ticket is fraudulent just by looking at it? Without scanning it? Without checking the system? Patricia's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. That's quite a skill. Margaret stepped forward, holding up her phone. I've already reviewed the system records. Andrew's ticket was purchased 18 days ago with a valid credit card. It was confirmed. It was legitimate in every way. There was absolutely nothing irregular about it. Patricia turned back to Jessica. Did you scan the ticket before tearing it up? Silence. Did you check his ID? Silence. Did you look at the confirmation email he offered to show you? Jessica's silence was damning. Around them, the crowd murmured. Several people called out variations of, she didn't check anything, and she just ripped it up. Patricia's cameraman, Jerome, made sure to capture Jessica's face. The guilt written clearly across it, the inability to meet anyone's eyes, the trembling hands. Let me ask you a different question, Patricia said quietly. How many tickets have you torn up in your 35-year career? Jessica's head snapped up. What? It's a simple question. How many times have you physically destroyed a passenger's boarding pass because you suspected fraud? Jessica's brain scrambled. The truth was, never. In 35 years, she'd never once torn up a ticket. She'd called supervisors. She'd asked passengers to step aside while she verified. She'd even had security escort people away. But she'd never destroyed someone's property in anger. Until today. Until Andrew. I can't remember exact numbers, Jessica said weakly. Really? Patricia looked genuinely surprised. I would think that tearing up someone's ticket would be memorable. It's quite a dramatic action. Wouldn't you say that's something you'd remember? A man in the crowd called out, I fly this route twice a month. I've seen Jessica working for years. She's never done anything like this. Another passenger, a middle-aged black woman, spoke up, her voice shaking with emotion. But I've seen how she treats people who look like me and that boy. The size, the eye rolls, the extra scrutiny. I've seen it all. Several other passengers of color nodded and murmured agreement. A Latino man said, "She made me unpack my entire carry-on last month. Said it looked suspicious. Never explained what was suspicious about clothes and a laptop." Patricia listened to each person, noting names, getting contact information. This was bigger than one incident. This was a pattern. Jessica felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet. This couldn't be happening. These people were lying. They were exaggerating. They were making her into some kind of monster when she'd just been doing her job. "I treat everyone the same," Jessica said desperately. "I don't see color. I'm not racist." The words hung in the air like a confession rather than a defense. Patricia turned to Andrew. "Andrew, can you walk me through exactly what happened?" "Take your time." Andrew took a breath and began to speak. His voice was quiet at first, then grew stronger as he talked. He explained how excited he'd been about the competition, how his mother had saved money, how he'd arrived at the gate early, nervous and eager. "I handed her my boarding pass," Andrew said, pointing to Jessica. "She took one look at me, and I saw her face change. It was like she'd already decided something before I even said a word." "What happened next?" Patricia prompted gently. She looked at the ticket for maybe 2 seconds, didn't scan it, didn't check anything. Then she just ripped it right in front of me, and she said it was fake. "Did you ask to show her proof?" "Yes, ma'am. Yes, Patricia. I tried to show her my confirmation email. She wouldn't take it. I asked her to check the system. She wouldn't take it." Andrew's voice cracked. "She refused everything. She just called me a liar and called security." Patricia turned back to Jessica. "Is this accurate?" Jessica wanted to deny it. She wanted to say Andrew was exaggerating or misremembering, but there were too many witnesses, too many phones, too much evidence. I thought..." Jessica couldn't finish. "You thought what?" Patricia pressed. "Help me understand your thinking. A 16-year-old boy hands you a boarding pass, without checking any systems, without scanning anything, without looking at any verification. You decide it's fake and destroy it. What made you so certain?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Jessica looked around at all the faces staring at her. Black faces, white faces, Latino faces, Asian faces, all looking at her with disgust, disappointment, anger. And suddenly, Jessica saw herself through their eyes. Really saw herself. She saw a woman who'd spent 35 years accumulating small acts of prejudice like layers of dust. She saw someone who'd use her authority to make herself feel bigger by making others feel smaller. She saw a person who'd gotten so comfortable with her biases that she'd stopped questioning them entirely. She saw someone who just destroyed a child's dreams because of the color of his skin. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Jessica actually gasped, stumbling backward. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then louder, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But the words felt hollow, useless, like trying to unring a bell or unbreak glass. Andrew looked at her, and Jessica saw no forgiveness in his eyes. Just exhaustion and sadness. "Do you know what today is?" Andrew asked quietly. Jessica shook her head. "Today is my 16th birthday," Andrew said. "My mom worked the night shift last night, so she could be awake to drive me to the airport this morning. She gave me a card and told me how proud she was. She said this trip was my birthday present, a chance to show the world how smart I am, a chance to maybe win a scholarship that could change our whole lives." His voice wavered but didn't break. "And you tried to take it all away. Not because I did anything wrong, but because you looked at me and decided I was a criminal." Several people in the crowd were openly crying now. Rebecca, the young flight attendant, covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. Patricia turned to Margaret. "What happens now?" Margaret's expression was grim. "Jessica Lewis is terminated effective immediately. I'm filing formal complaints with the FAA, the EEOC, and Michigan Civil Rights Department. The airline will issue a public apology to Andrew and his family. And we'll be reviewing every single incident involving Ms. Lewis over the past decade to identify any other instances of discrimination." Jessica made a small, broken sound. "Please, I have a family. I have a mortgage. I've given this company 35 years. And you spent those 35 years abusing the power they gave you. Margaret cut her off coldly. You're done, Jessica. Security will escort you out. You'll receive information about your final paycheck and Cobra in the mail. As if summoned, 3 airport security officers arrived. But they weren't there for Andrew. They were there for Jessica. Ms. Lewis, one of them said professionally, we need you to come with us. Jessica looked around desperately, searching for an ally, a sympathetic face, anyone who might defend her. She found none. Even David, who nodded along with her earlier, had disappeared into the crowd. As security led her away, Jessica's perfect uniform rumpled and her perfect hair disheveled. Patricia called out one more question. Do you think this would have happened if Andrew were white? Jessica stopped walking. Her shoulders shook. And though she didn't turn around, though she didn't answer out loud, everyone there knew the truth. No, it wouldn't have. The gate area slowly began to return to normal. Margaret made calls to get Andrew a new boarding pass printed. Patricia interviewed several more witnesses. Rebecca approached Andrew and apologized profusely, promising to be braver next time she witnessed injustice. Andrew stood quietly, processing everything that had happened. In the span of 20 minutes, he'd gone from humiliated teenager to vindicated victim. But vindication didn't erase the pain. It did remove the memory of standing there while someone in authority treated him as less than human. Patricia came back to Andrew with a card. I'd like to follow up on this story. Document your competition. Talk to your mother. Show people not just what Jessica did wrong, but who you really are. Would that be okay? Andrew looked at his aunt, who smiled encouragingly. Okay, Andrew said. If it helps other kids who go through this, then okay. Margaret finally got Andrew's new boarding pass printed. The gate agent, a different person entirely, apologized multiple times and upgraded Andrew to first class at no charge. As Andrew prepared to board, Patricia set up for one final shot. Andrew, she said gently, is there anything you want to say to people watching this? Andrew thought for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were measured and mature beyond his 16 years. I just want to say that I'm not special. What happened to me happens to black kids every single day, in stores, in schools, in airports, everywhere. We're treated like threats before we're treated like humans. And I was lucky my aunt worked for the airline. There were cameras. People stood up for me. But what about all the kids who aren't lucky? Who don't have someone powerful to protect them? Who get kicked out or arrested or worse, and nobody ever knows? He paused, his eyes shining with unshed tears. This can't keep happening. People like Jessica Lewis need to be held accountable. Because if they're not, nothing will ever change. The crowd that remained burst into applause. Several people approached Andrew to shake his hand, to hug him, to tell him how brave he was. But Andrew didn't feel brave. He felt tired. Margaret put her arm around her nephew. Come on, birthday boy. Let's get you to Chicago. You have a competition to win. As they walked toward the boarding gate, Andrew's phone buzzed. It was a text from his mother. Airport security just called me. Said everything is okay now. I'm so proud of you, baby. Go show them what Campbell brilliance looks like. Love you forever. Andrew smiled, really smiled. For the first time since arriving at the airport, he was going to be okay. He was going to make it to his competition. He was going to make his mother proud. But as he settled into his first-class seat and the plane began to taxi, Andrew couldn't shake one troubling question. What was going to happen to Jessica Lewis now? And more importantly, what was happening to her that very moment, as airport security escorted her out of the terminal and toward a future she'd never imagined? One where her name was about to become synonymous with everything ugly about discrimination in America? Because while Andrew was flying Chicago to chase his dreams, Jessica was walking into a nightmare that was only just beginning. The video footage was already spreading across social media like wildfire. The hashtag Justice for Andrew was trending worldwide. And somewhere in a television studio, producers were already preparing to make Jessica Lewis's actions the lead story on every major news network in the country. Her 35-year career was over, but her infamy was just beginning. Comment below if you've ever been profiled or discriminated against. Your stories matter. Sharing them helps expose the patterns that people like Jessica Lewis created. Don't let anyone silence your truth, because silence is exactly what allows discrimination to continue. Jessica Lewis sat in a small, windowless room at Detroit Metropolitan Airport Security Headquarters. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unflattering glow. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her fingernails digging into her palms. Across from her sat Airport Police Officer Raymond Chun and his partner, Officer Sarah Martinez. They weren't there to arrest her, not yet anyway, but to take her statement and file their report. "Ms. Lewis," Officer Chin said, his voice neutral and professional, "can you explain your reasoning for tearing up Andrew Campbell's boarding pass?" Jessica's mouth felt dry. She'd been asked this question 3 times now by 3 different people, and she still didn't have a good answer. I thought it was suspicious," she said again, the words sounding weaker each time she repeated them. "Suspicious how?" Officer Martinez asked, pen poised over her notepad. "Be specific." Jessica closed her eyes. What could she say? That Andrew had looked nervous? Lots of passengers looked nervous. That his clothes seemed cheap? That was hardly evidence of fraud. That he was young? Teenagers flew all the time. That he was black? The real reason sat in her throat like a stone, too shameful to speak aloud but too obvious to deny. "I can't explain it," Jessica finally whispered. "It was a feeling." Officer Martinez stopped writing and looked up. "A feeling," she repeated flatly. "You destroyed a minor's property and traumatized him based on a feeling?" Jessica flinched. "I've been doing this job for 35 years. I've developed instincts." "Let me stop you there," Officer Chin interrupted. He pulled out his tablet and turned it toward Jessica. "Do you know what this is?" On the screen was a video. Jessica's stomach dropped as she recognized herself, standing at gate C-17, ripping Andrew's ticket with that look of disgust on her face. "This video has been viewed 4 million times in the last hour," Officer Chin continued. "There are compilation videos being made. People are digging into your history. And Ms. Lewis, what they're finding isn't pretty." He swiped to another screen, a thread on social media filled with testimonials. "Flight attendant Jessica Lewis made me unpack my entire bag and search through my personal items, including my underwear, in front of everyone. I'm a 45-year-old professor. My crime? Being black in first class." Swipe. Jessica Lewis literally sighed in annoyance when I asked for headphones. Then I watched her cheerfully give them to the white passenger next to me without being asked. Swipe. She questioned whether my service dog was real. Made me show her documentation twice. Then she seated me in the back of the plane, even though I had paid for a seat near the front. The testimonials went on, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. People Jessica barely remembered, their experiences seared into their memories while she'd forgotten them entirely. Jessica felt sick. She wanted to say they were lying, exaggerating, taking things out of context. But looking at the sheer volume of complaints, the specific details, the consistency of the pattern, she couldn't deny it anymore. Officer Martinez leaned forward. "Ms. Lewis, I need to ask you directly. Did you tear up Andrew Campbell's ticket because he's black?" The question hung in the air. This was it. The moment of truth that would determine not just the police report, but potentially her legal liability, her future, everything. Jessica could lie. She could say no. She could claim it was a legitimate mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but the ugly truth. But what was the point? The evidence was everywhere. The videos, the testimonials, the patterns stretching back years. Lying now wouldn't save her. It would only make things worse. "I don't know," Jessica said finally, and it was the most honest answer she could give. "I don't think I consciously thought he's black, therefore he's a criminal. But looking back now, I can't think of any other reason why I reacted the way I did. Why I didn't check his ticket. Why I got so angry so fast. Why I—" Her voice broke. "Why I destroyed a child's boarding pass on his birthday." Officer Martinez wrote this down carefully. Officer Chin closed his tablet. "We're going to need you to stay here while we complete our investigation," he said. "You're not under arrest, But you're not free to leave either. Do you understand? Jessica nodded numbly. As the officers stepped out to consult with their supervisor, Jessica was left alone with her thoughts and her phone, which she'd been avoiding looking at for the past hour. With trembling hands, she unlocked it. 47 missed calls. Over 200 text messages. Her social media notifications had been turned off, but she could see the numbers climbing, thousands, tens of thousands. She opened her text messages. Most were from blocked numbers, people who'd somehow gotten her cell phone and wanted her to know exactly what they thought of her. The messages ranged from angry to vicious to outright threatening, but mixed in were messages from people she knew. Her daughter, Emily, who lived in California. "Mom, what did you do? It's all over the news here. People are finding out you're my mother. I can't believe you would do something like this." Her ex-husband, Robert. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that ruined our marriage. You never listened. You never learned. Now everyone can see what I dealt with for 20 years. Her best friend of 15 years, Linda. "I can't defend this, Jess. I just can't. Please don't contact me." Her brother, Michael. "The family is getting harassment calls. Reporters showed up at Mom's house. What were you thinking?" Jessica's hand shook so badly, she nearly dropped the phone. Her entire life was collapsing. Not slowly, not gradually, but in real time, like a building imploding. She opened a news app. The story was everywhere. Flight attendant tears up black teen's ticket on his birthday. Viral video shows shocking racial profiling at Detroit airport. Regional director's nephew humiliated by senior flight attendant. 35-year airline employee fired after discriminatory incident. And below each headline, the views kept climbing. The comments sections were filled with fury, with people calling for her to be prosecuted, banned from flying, investigated for hate crimes. But what struck Jessica most were the comments from other people of color sharing their own similar experiences. The sheer number of them, the pain in their words, the exhaustion of constantly being suspected, questioned, doubted, treated as less than. Had she done this to all of them? Had she been part of the system that made people feel small and unsafe for 35 years? The answer was yes. She knew it was yes. Jessica opened a news article that included an interview with Andrew. The video showed him sitting calmly, speaking thoughtfully, demonstrating the kind of maturity and grace that made Jessica's actions look even worse by comparison. "I don't hate her," Andrew was saying. "I'm angry, yes. I'm hurt, but I don't hate her. I just want people to understand that this happens all the time, and it needs to stop." The reporter asked, "What do you want to happen to Jessica Lewis?" Andrew thought for a moment. "I want her to understand what she did, not just to me, but to everyone she treated this way. I want her to really understand, and then I want her to do better, to be better, because hate doesn't fix hate." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. This child, this boy she'd treated like a criminal, was showing more compassion toward her than she'd shown him. More wisdom, more humanity. What kind of person had she become? The door opened. Officer Chin returned, and his expression was grave. "Ms. Lewis, I need to inform you that the district attorney's office has been contacted. They're reviewing the case to determine if criminal charges are warranted." Jessica's heart stopped. Criminal charges? For what? Destruction of property. Assault. Andrew could argue he felt physically threatened. Violation of civil rights. Michigan has specific laws about discrimination in public accommodations. Officer Chen's voice wasn't unkind, but it was firm. This isn't just an employment matter anymore. This is potentially criminal. The room spun. Jessica gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "I didn't assault anyone," she managed to say. "I never touched him." Assault can include verbal threats and actions that cause someone to fear for their safety, Officer Martinez explained, re-entering the room. "You tore up his property in an aggressive manner. You called security on him. You invaded his personal space, according to multiple witnesses. A prosecutor could make a case." Jessica couldn't breathe. Criminal charges. A trial. Possibly jail time. For one moment of anger. For one terrible decision. No, not one moment. For 35 years of small cruelties that had finally caught up with her. What do I do? Jessica asked, her voice small and childlike. Officer Chen exchanged a glance with his partner. You get a lawyer, a good one, and you prepare yourself because the situation is going to get much worse before it gets better. He was right. At that very moment, outside the security office, a crowd of protesters had begun to gather. Word had spread that Jessica was being held for questioning, and people wanted to make sure she faced real consequences. They carried signs, justice for Andrew, and airline discrimination, and flying while black isn't a crime. News vans had set up in the airport parking lot. Patricia Okonkwo was preparing for a live broadcast. Other journalists were interviewing witnesses, passengers, airline employees, anyone who had a story about Jessica Lewis. And in offices across the country, civil rights organizations were mobilizing. The NAACP was preparing a statement. The ACLU was reviewing the case for potential litigation. Advocacy groups were using Andrew's story to highlight systemic discrimination in air travel. Jessica Lewis had become the face of a national conversation about racism, implicit bias, and the abuse of authority. Back in the interrogation room, Jessica's phone buzzed with a call from a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. Jessica Lewis? A professional female voice asked. Yes. This is Monica Brennan from Brennan and Associates. I'm an attorney specializing in employment law and civil rights cases. I'm calling to offer you representation. Jessica felt a surge of hope. Yes, please. I need help. I don't know what to do. Before you retain me, you should know my fee is $500 an hour with a minimum retainer of $25,000. Can you afford that? Jessica's hope died. $25,000. She had maybe $8,000 in savings. Her house had equity, but that would take time to access. Her credit cards were already maxed out from her daughter's college tuition. I don't have that kind of money, Jessica admitted. Then I'd suggest you contact the public defender's office if charges are filed. Good luck, Ms. Lewis. The line went dead. Jessica stared at her phone in disbelief. Even lawyers didn't want to help her unless she could pay a fortune. She was truly alone. Officer Martinez's radio crackled. She stepped outside to take the call, then returned with an update. The airline has issued a statement, she said. They've terminated you with cause, which means no severance pay, no references, and your pension is under review. They're also cooperating fully with all investigations and have implemented immediate retraining for all flight crew on implicit bias and discrimination. Each word was another nail in Jessica's coffin. No job, no severance, possibly no pension, criminal charges pending, her reputation destroyed, her family distancing themselves, her future completely uncertain. And for what? For tearing up a teenager's ticket because her prejudices ran so deep, she didn't even recognize them until they'd already destroyed everything. Jessica put her head in her hands and finally, fully broke down. Deep, racking sobs shook her body. 35 years of career, gone. Her sense of identity, shattered. Her belief that she was a good person, revealed as a comfortable lie. Officer Chun, despite everything, felt a flicker of sympathy. He'd seen this before. People who'd lived their entire lives without examining their biases, suddenly confronted with the consequences of their actions. It was never pretty. Ms. Lewis, he said quietly, you're going to get through this. But you need to understand, the only way forward is to truly face what you've done, not defend it, not minimize it, really face it. Jessica looked up at him through tear-swollen eyes. How? She asked brokenly. How do I face the fact that I'm a racist? That I hurt a child? That I'm everything I swore I'd never be? The same way anyone faces hard truths, Officer Martinez said, not unkindly, one day at a time, with help, with accountability, with change. Jessica nodded, but she couldn't imagine a path forward. All she could see was a video of herself, playing on loop in her mind. The disgust on her face, the anger in her voice, the casual cruelty of ripping that ticket. That was who she'd become. That was who she'd been for years, maybe decades. And now everyone knew it. Officer Chen's phone buzzed. He read the message and stood up abruptly. Ms. Lewis, You're free to go for now. But don't leave the state, and make sure we have your current contact information. You'll be hearing from the DA's office within 48 hours. Jessica stood on shaky legs. Can I leave through a back exit? The protesters. Officer Martinez shook her head. The protesters are at every exit. There's no way out that doesn't involve facing them. Jessica's stomach dropped. She had to walk through a crowd of people who hated her. People who'd seen the video. People who knew exactly what she'd done. I'll arrange for officers to escort you to your car, Officer Chen offered. For your safety. Jessica nodded gratefully, though she knew that even a police escort wouldn't protect her from the cameras, the shouting, the judgment she absolutely deserved. As she gathered her belongings, her purse, her phone, the airline badge she'd worn with pride for 35 years and now had to surrender, Jessica thought about Andrew Campbell. He was probably in Chicago by now, probably checking into his hotel, preparing for his competition, surrounded by people who believed in him. While she was here, escorted by police, about to face an angry mob, with nothing left but consequences. But as the officers led her toward the exit, Jessica didn't know about the one final twist that was waiting for her outside those doors. She didn't know that standing among the protesters was someone whose presence would change everything yet again. Someone whose connection to the story ran deeper than anyone had realized. Someone who had information that would turn Jessica's nightmare into something far more complex and far more public than it already was. And when Jessica walked through those doors and saw this person's face, she would realize that her reckoning had only just begun. Subscribe if you believe that accountability matters more than comfort. Jessica Lewis spent 35 years getting away with discrimination because people stayed silent. Don't be silent. Hit that subscribe button and stand on the right side of history. The automatic door slid open, and Jessica Lewis stepped out into chaos. The crowd was larger than she'd expected. At least 100 people, maybe more. They pressed against the barriers that airport security had hastily erected, their signs held high, their voices unified in chants that made Jessica's blood run cold. No justice, no peace. Racist cops off our streets. Racist staff off our planes. Andrew Campbell matters. Black Lives Matter. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Reporters shouted questions over each other, creating a wall of noise that was almost physical in its intensity. Ms. Lewis, do you have anything to say to Andrew Campbell? Do you admit you racially profiled him? Will you resign or were you fired? How does it feel to be the face of airline discrimination? The two police officers flanked Jessica, creating a human shield as they moved toward the parking structure. Jessica kept her head down, her hair falling forward to hide her face. But it was useless. The cameras were everywhere, capturing every angle. And then she heard a voice that cut through all the noise like a blade. Jessica. Something in that voice made Jessica look up. It wasn't angry like the protesters. It wasn't aggressive like the reporters. It was something else. Something desperate and urgent and familiar. Standing at the edge of the crowd, separated from the protesters by security barriers, was a woman about Jessica's age. She had dark skin, graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that held a mixture of fury and something that looked almost like grief. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She knew this woman. Diane, Jessica whispered, though her voice was lost in the noise. Diane Washington pushed against the barrier, trying to get closer. A security guard moved to stop her, but she held up both hands in a peaceful gesture. I need to talk to her, Diane shouted. Please, just 5 minutes. Officer Chen looked at Jessica questioningly. You know her? Jessica nodded slowly, her mind reeling backward through time. Diane Washington had been Jessica's best friend in high school. They'd been inseparable. Two girls from different worlds who bonded over shared dreams of traveling the world. They'd studied together, laughed together, planned futures together. And then, during senior year, something had changed. Jessica had started dating a boy whose parents had made it clear that he shouldn't be associating with certain types. Jessica, young and stupid and desperate to fit in, had started pulling away from Diane, missing their plans, avoiding her in the hallways. Eventually, she'd stopped calling altogether. She'd chosen acceptance over friendship. She'd chosen comfort over courage. Jessica hadn't seen Diane Washington in almost 40 years. "Let her through," Jessica said quietly. Officer Chin hesitated, then nodded to security. They created a narrow path of crowd, and Diane walked through it with her head held high, ignoring confused murmurs of protesters who didn't understand why one of their own was approaching the enemy. Diane stopped 3 feet from Jessica. Up close, Jessica could see the tears streaming down her friend's face, former friend's face, could see the anger and pain written in every line of her expression. "Do you remember me?" Diane asked, her voice shaking. "Yes," Jessica whispered. "Diane, do you remember what you said to me the last time we spoke?" Jessica's mind scrambled through decades-old memories, tried to recall that final conversation. They'd been at Diane's locker. Jessica had been rushing somewhere. A party, maybe? Or a date. I don't remember exactly," Jessica admitted. "I do," Diane said. "I remember every single word. I asked you why you've been avoiding me. You said you were busy. I said we used to make time. And you know what you told me, Jessica?" The crowd had gone quieter, sensing the weight of this moment. Even the reporters had stopped shouting, their microphones extended to catch every word. "You said, maybe we've just grown apart. People change. We want different things now." Diane's voice cracked. "But that wasn't true, was it? We didn't want different things. You wanted the same things. You just didn't want them with me anymore. Because I was black, it was easier for you if I wasn't in your life." Jessica felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She'd buried that memory so deep, had rewritten it in her mind so many times, that she'd almost convinced herself it had never happened. "Diane, I was 17. And now you're 57, Diane interrupted. "And you still haven't changed. You still look at people who look like me, people like my son, my grandchildren, and you see problems instead of people." "Your son," Jessica repeated weakly. "Yes, my son. He's a pilot now. He flies for Delta. And do you know how many times he's been stopped by airport security? Questioned about whether his uniform is real? Asked to prove he's actually a pilot? Dozens of times, Jessica. Dozens. Because of people like you who can't see past the skin." The protesters are completely silent now, hanging on every word. Patricia Okonkwo had her camera fixed on this scene, recognizing it for what it was, a moment of truth that went beyond one incident, beyond one teenager, to the heart of how discrimination infects every aspect of life. "I came here today," Diane continued, "because when I saw that video of what you did to that boy, to Andrew Campbell, I saw you doing to him exactly what you did to me all those years ago. Deciding he didn't belong. Deciding he was less than. Deciding that your comfort, your prejudices, your fear were more important than his humanity. I'm sorry," Jessica said, the words feeling pathetically inadequate. "Diane, I'm so sorry. For high school. For today. For everything." "Are you?" Diane challenged. "Are you really sorry, or are you just sorry you got caught?" "Because, Jessica, I've been watching you for 40 years. Every time I fly through Detroit, I see you working. And I've seen how you treat passengers who look like me. The size, the extra scrutiny, the coldness." Jessica's eyes widened. "You've seen me? All these years." "Many times," Diane confirmed. "I even tried to say hello once, about 10 years ago. You looked right through me, didn't even recognize me. Or maybe you did, and you just didn't care." The weight of this revelation crushed down on Jessica. Diane had been watching, had seen her patterns, had witnessed her transformation from the girl who'd abandoned their friendship to the woman who'd torn up Andrew's ticket. "Why didn't you say something?" Jessica asked desperately. "Why? Because I kept hoping you'd change," Diane said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I kept thinking maybe you'd grow up, maybe you'd learn, maybe you'd become the person I thought you were when we were 17. But you didn't. You got worse." Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably, aware that this conversation was being broadcast live on multiple news channels, aware that it was creating something far more powerful than a simple scandal. Patricia Okonkwo stepped closer, her microphone extended. Ms. Washington, you're saying you witnessed Jessica Lewis discriminating against passengers for years? Diane turned to face the camera fully. Yes, not just her. There are others too. But Jessica was consistent. She had patterns. And I watched those patterns hurt people over and over again while she kept a job and kept her power and kept doing damage. Why come forward now? Patricia asked gently. Because of Andrew Campbell, Diane said simply, because he's 16 years old, because it was his birthday, because he deserves better, because all of us deserve better. She looked back at Jessica, and because I'm tired of protecting people who won't protect us. Jessica felt herself breaking apart completely. Every defense she constructed, every excuse she made, every justification she'd hidden behind, all of it crumbled to dust. I don't know how to fix this, Jessica said, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to fix what I've done. To you, to Andrew, to everyone. You can't, Diane said bluntly. You can't unfold 40 years of hurt. You can't give Andrew back his birthday. You can't give me back our friendship. What's done is done. Then what do I do? Jessica asked, completely lost. Diane was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but no less serious. You tell the truth. All of it. You face what you've done without excuses or deflection. You help expose the system that allowed you to get away with this for so long. And then you spend the rest of your life being better. Not for forgiveness, because you don't deserve that, but because it's the right thing to do. Jessica nodded slowly, understanding that this was the only path forward, as painful as it would be. Patricia stepped in with another question. Ms. Lewis, would you be willing to give an interview? To explain what happened from your perspective? Every instinct screamed at Jessica to say no, to run, to hide, to protect what little was left of her dignity. But Diane's words echoed in her mind. Tell the truth. All of it. Yes, Jessica said. I'll tell you everything. The next hour was the hardest of Jessica's life. Sitting in front of Patricia's camera, with Diane present as a witness, Jessica gave an interview that would be played millions of times across the world. She admitted to tearing up Andrew's ticket without checking it. She admitted to racial profiling. She admitted to a pattern of discriminatory behavior stretching back years, maybe her entire career. She talked about her friendship with Diane and how she'd ended it out of cowardice. She talked about the small prejudices that had grown into larger ones. She talked about how power and authority had made it easy to act on her biases without consequences. I convinced myself I wasn't racist, Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. I told myself I was just doing my job, just following my instincts. But I was lying to myself. My instincts were racist. My actions were racist. I was racist. I am racist. And I hurt so many people because I refused to face that truth. Patricia asked the hard questions. Do you think you deserve forgiveness? No, Jessica answered immediately. I don't. Andrew Campbell doesn't owe me forgiveness. Diane doesn't owe me forgiveness. Nobody does. What do you want people to know? Jessica looked directly into the camera. I want people who look like me, white people, people with authority, people who think they're good people, to really examine their own behavior. Because I thought I was a good person too. And I was wrong. I caused real harm to real people. And I did it for decades without even realizing it because nobody held me accountable. She paused, gathering her courage for what she needed to say next. I also want to say something directly to Andrew Campbell, if he's watching this. Andrew, I am deeply, profoundly sorry for what I did to you. You did nothing wrong. Everything I said and did was based on prejudice and fear, not facts. You deserve better. You deserved respect and kindness, especially on your birthday. I stole something from you that I can never give back. Your sense of safety, your trust that adults will treat you fairly. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. When the interview was over, Jessica sat in exhausted silence. She exposed herself completely, stripped away every pretense, confessed to everything. It didn't feel like redemption. It felt like falling. Diane approached her one more time before leaving. That was brave, she said quietly. It doesn't change what you did, but it was brave. Will you ever forgive me? Jessica asked, even though she knew the answer. Diane considered the question carefully. I don't know. Maybe someday. But Jessica, that's not your concern right now. Your concern is making sure this never happens to anyone else. Your concern is burning down the system that protected you. Your concern is being better, not being forgiven. Jessica nodded, understanding. As Diane walked away, Jessica finally allowed herself to check her phone one more time. Among the hundreds of messages was one that made her heart stop. It was from Andrew Campbell. Her hands shook as she opened it. Ms. Lewis, my aunt showed me your interview. I don't forgive you. I'm not ready for that, and I might never be, but I hope you meant what you said. I hope you really do change. Not for me, for the next kid who looks like me who crosses your path. They deserve better than what you gave me. We all do. Jessica read the message 3 times, tears blurring her vision. That evening, Jessica sat alone in her house. The house she might lose when the lawsuits came, when the legal bills mounted, when her pension was stripped away. She opened her laptop and began to write. She wrote down every incident she could remember where she treated someone unfairly. Every time she'd been colder to a passenger of color. Every time she'd used her authority to make someone feel small. Every time she'd looked the other way when colleagues did the same. The list was long. Shamefully, horrifyingly long. But she kept writing because this was part of facing the truth. This was part of accountability. When she was done, she sent the document to the airline's corporate office, to the EOC, to the civil rights organizations investigating the case, and to Patricia Okonkwo. It was evidence against herself. It would probably lead to more lawsuits, more consequences, more pain, but it was the truth. And for the first time in 35 years, Jessica Lewis chose truth over comfort. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Andrew Campbell was preparing for the National Mathematics Competition. His Aunt Margaret had flown in to support him. His mother had taken time off work to be there. And despite everything that happened, or perhaps because of it, Andrew felt a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just competing for himself anymore. He was competing for every kid who'd been told they didn't belong. Every teenager who'd been suspected before being seen. Every person who'd been judged by their appearance rather than their character. The next morning, Andrew walked into the competition hall with his head held high, and he won. He didn't just win his category. He scored high enough to earn a full scholarship to MIT, covering tuition, room, board, and expenses for 4 years. When they announced his name, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. Many of the people there had seen the news, had followed his story, had been rooting for him to prove that he was exactly what he'd always claimed to be, brilliant, capable, and deserving of respect. Andrew stood on that stage, holding his trophy and his scholarship certificate, and he thought about Jessica Lewis. He thought about Diane Washington. He thought about his mother working night shifts. He thought about his aunt fighting for him. He thought about all the people who'd stood up when it mattered. And he made himself a promise. He would use his education, his platform, his voice to make sure that what happened to him would become harder and harder for people like Jessica Lewis to get away with. Back in Michigan, Jessica watched the news coverage of Andrew's victory. She saw his smile, heard his speech, witnessed his triumph, and she understood that this was what she'd almost stolen from the world. Not just Andrew's moment, but everything he would go on to accomplish. Every life he would touch. Every problem he would solve. Every person he would inspire. The charges came 2 days later. The district attorney filed 3 counts: destruction of property, civil rights violations, and making false accusations against a minor. Jessica's public defender, a young woman fresh out of law school who was overworked and underpaid, told her the best she could hope for was a plea deal: community service, probation, mandatory bias training, and a permanent record. Jessica took the deal. The judge who sentenced her was a black woman in her 60s. She looked at Jessica with an expression that was neither cruel nor kind, just tired. Ms. Lewis, the judge said, I've seen hundreds of cases like yours. People who claimed they didn't know better, didn't mean harm, didn't realize the impact of their actions. But ignorance is not innocence, and impact matters more than intent. She sentenced Jessica to 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service working with civil rights organizations, mandatory counseling for racial bias, and required her to speak at schools and airports about discrimination and accountability. You will spend the next 2 years educating others about the harm you caused. The judge said, you will face uncomfortable questions. You will relive your worst moments repeatedly. And you will do it because those are the consequences of your choices. Jessica accepted the sentence with a simple, yes, Your Honor. 6 months later, Jessica stood in front of a high school assembly in Detroit. She told her story, all of it. The students listened with varying expressions, some angry, some sympathetic, most just thoughtful. When she finished, a young black girl raised her hand. Do you think you're a better person now? Jessica considered the question carefully. No, she said honestly. I think I'm a more aware person. I think I'm trying to be better. But I spent 57 years building up bad habits and prejudices. I can't undo that in 6 months. What I can do is be honest about it, work on it every day, and try to help other people avoid making my mistakes. Another student asked, have you talked to Andrew Campbell? No, Jessica said. He doesn't owe me his time or attention. He's at MIT now, studying to change the world. The best thing I can do for him is stay out of his way and make sure what happened to him doesn't happen to anyone else. The assembly ended and students filed out, but one boy, tall, dark-skinned, about 16, lingered behind. Ms. Lewis, he said quietly, I just want to say, I've had people treat me the way you treated Andrew. Security guards, teachers, store owners. People who look at me and see a problem before they see a person. Jessica's heart ached. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you this for an apology, the boy continued. I'm telling you because I want you to know that what you're doing, telling your story, admitting you were wrong, it actually matters. It helps. Not because it changes the past, but because it shows other people like you that they can change too. He walked away before Jessica could respond, leaving her standing in the empty auditorium with tears streaming down her face. Change was possible. Not easy, not comfortable, not redemptive in any fairy tale way, but possible. And for Jessica Lewis, who had lost everything, her career, her reputation, her sense of identity, that small possibility of doing better, of causing less harm, of maybe helping someone else avoid her mistakes, was the only thing she had left to hold on to. It would have to be enough, because Andrew Campbell was at MIT, building his future, because Diane Washington was finally free from the weight of protecting someone who'd never protected her, because thousands of people had watched this story unfold and examined their own biases, their own blind spots, their own capacity for harm, and because sometimes the only way forward is through the fire of accountability, no matter how much it burns. Jessica Lewis had spent 35 years building a career on unchecked prejudice. She would spend the rest of her life tearing that system down, one honest conversation at a time. It wasn't redemption, but it was responsibility. And finally, after 57 years, Jessica Lewis understood the difference.